Thank you, everyone, for showing up. We're going to talk about making kubectl, kubectl, kubecontrol, whatever you want to call it, PowerShell friendly. I'm the Posh Wolf. That's what I go by online. All of my sessions I have in this GitHub repository. That includes the slides, the code, everything. So don't feel like you have to take pictures, but you can if you want. And I'll pause in case someone wants to snap a picture of that. And I'm sorry it's a little small. I can give you the link afterwards if you need it. The first thing I want to get out of the way is, oh, do you want to go back a slide? Back a slide? It's all good. All right. First thing I want to get away, how do you guys pronounce cube? I say kubectl. Does anyone say kubecontrol? Kubectl? Kubectl, I like it. Any other pronunciations? I've heard kubecontrol a lot at the conference from some other people. Anything else? OK. There's not a right way to say it. That's the point here. Anyway, so I'm Anthony Howell. That's my name. I'm from Eugene, Oregon. It's about a 6-ish hour train ride south for me, which is really comfortable. You don't think of Americans riding trains, but the Amtrak is not bad. So I asked ChatGPT what a typical Eugenian person is. ChatGPT doesn't like talking about marijuana, so it skipped that part of Eugene. But progressive, outdoorsy, creative, friendly, open-minded, mostly accurate. So I left it in there. I've got 3 kids, 1 on the way, so that's where 3 and a third, 2 dogs, wife, and a cat. Been in IT for a while, and I intended to update the slide. I haven't actually done anything with blog, Twitter, Pluralsight, or consulting last year. I left links in there. I am, however, employed. They're not paying for me to be here, so I'm not going to mention them. But they're a good employer. So instead of that, I want to share a fun fact. So my first summit, I shouldn't have actually made it, because my boss waited until the last second to say, oh, hey, by the way, you know too much PowerShell. Why would we send you to a PowerShell conference? Doesn't make sense to me, but it made sense for him for some reason. So I signed up after the deadline, and I sent an email to the organizers. I don't remember who it was back then. Might have been Don Jones. I said, hey, by the way, if you guys have a ticket opens up last minute, I can drive up. I don't have to book travel. I just need to find a hotel, and we're good. Week or 2 before the summit, and I still remember this. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was out shopping with the kids at the grocery store. I got the email. We threw everything in the cart. I ran home, and I accepted it and made it to my first summit. So, and this is a favor for my wife. If someone can snap a picture while I'm up here talking and send it to me, I would appreciate that. So it's just a funny thing that she likes. Thank you. Kevin, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, so you can send it to me on Twitter or whatever. All right, so what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about what the problem is with kubectl and PowerShell. It's not a problem with either of them. It's a problem with them together. Okay. We're going to get into why not Crescendo or -o JSON. A lot of opinions there. I'm going to warn you guys about. I'm going to explain what my solution, what it requires, and why I'm doing it in certain ways. And we'll get into the technical stuff, some gotchas, the other technical stuff, so with parsing and then with formats. And then because when I practice my presentation is a little slow or a little short, we're going to get into filtering left with kubectl. Because I found that once I was parsing objects, I was using where object way too much. So we're going to get into some of the things that I found with that. All right. So the problem, first of all, kubectl is just standard out, right? That's fine in Bash. But PowerShell, not so much. And also, that's it. Like, that's the only problem, in my opinion, with kubectl. I appreciate the clapping. All right, so first off, Crescendo. Is anyone here not familiar with Crescendo? OK, so Crescendo this is the short version. I've not used it very much. But Crescendo is a module that allows you to use JSON to generate a wrapper for an executable. So you would look at kubectl. It's an executable. I want to make a wrapper. Let's use Crescendo. Don't. And this is why. So first off, Crescendo is more PowerShell-y. You can get functions that are get-kubepod, right? You can do that. But what you're doing is you're teaching yourself skills that are not cross-shell compatible, meaning that if you're ever not in PowerShell, how do you get pods from kubectl? And that's a bad example because it's just kubectl get pod, right? It's not very complicated. But what's that? Or yeah, -a. Yeah, thank you. But the point is, learning a Crescendo version of an industry standard tool is a waste of time. Do not do that, right? And my point with this is I wrote a very basic wrapper that had those get, kubepod commands, and then I found myself in a bash shell needing to use kubectl, and I didn't know what to do, okay? That's my opinion, right? Just your opinion, man. Cool? You guys?
Tests agree with you.
What's that?
But the Kubectl, the Kubernetes certificate tests agree with you. If you want to get certified for Kubernetes, don't use Crescendo.
See, now what I'm going to do, what is your name? Joel. So what Joel is saying is that getting certified for Kubernetes is also another reason. So what I'm going to do after this is I'm going to edit my slides, add that in there on this page, get certified, learn kubectl. There we go. Thank you. I didn't even think of that. All right. Secondly, the other option, so kubectl has the -o JSON, right? JSON is a very structured language. We can convert it with one commandlet. But what is the problem here? You guys should be able to see this. How many extra characters do you have to type for this command? So I'm really lazy. I alias kubectl to K, okay? I don't like to type a lot of characters. That's too much typing, in my opinion, okay? And it's also differently structured data than what you get from kubectl get pod versus kubectl get pod -o JSON, convert from JSON. Again, I'm really sorry, guys. That is just my opinion. So I watched The Big Lebowski recently, so that stuck with me. Sorry, guys. All right, so my goal with this project was to have kubectl output objects, maintain kubectl syntax, preserve the output formats, but also keep it reliable and efficient. I don't want to do a lot of parsing with it, okay? So what does that look like to you? In summary, I really just want kubectl that outputs objects. Like, that's all I want, right? Please, can we have that natively? Okay, so here we go. This is a teaser. We'll get into how this works. So first line here, this is kubectl get node, right? It looks normal, okay? And this is an AKS cluster. I'm really cheap. I have one node. Don't do that in production. Down here, this is using my module. I call it special K. It just was a fun name. And you notice K get node. It's opinionated. That's how the function is. If you guys would like to rename it in your own versions, feel free to. But you can see here, this is a table. This is a PowerShell object. There's no format table. I'm not doing anything to it. We'll walk through how to do this. But that allows you to do where object. So where status equals ready. I only have one node, so it's still just the same node. But that's the idea, right? Okay. Prerequisites. PowerShell 7. I don't like supporting backwards compatible to 5.1, let alone any further back. Funny story, 6 months ago I did a project that had to support PowerShell v2, and that was miserable. So I try not to do backwards stuff. Okay. Demo environment here, I've got Windows 10, latest version of VS Code, PowerShell 7.3.4. My module, special K, it's v0.2.1 right now. I've got a 0.3 beta on my laptop that's not published. I'll get that published soon. But you can wait for the updated version, or I can send it what I'm working on. Also, kubectl, and in my demo environment, I'm using a Kubernetes on Docker. So I didn't want to have to worry about being able to connect to the Wi-Fi, even though it seems to work great. I just didn't want to have to worry about that. So, all right. Any questions so far? Cool. So parsing. What we're going to get into for parsing. So this is what the process that I'm using looks like. And if you guys have feedback or hey, that's really dumb. Why are you doing it that way? I'd love to hear it. But first off, the headers on kubectl output have a standard minimum width. So we can take advantage of that and use that to calculate the indexes of each of the spaces, insert semicolons, and convert from CSV. It's dead simple, okay? And then to get the table format, we're going to insert formats into it using the PS object of type name.insert. Show you how that works. And then when we get into the section talking about formats, talk about how I'm auto-generating the formats. Because writing PowerShell formats is miserable. Okay, who here has done that in XML by hand? Yeah, it sucks. Okay, I did learn that there is a James Brennan who's got an easy out module for doing this. I haven't looked into it, but supposedly it makes it a lot easier. OK, so let's walk through how the parsing works, and then we'll actually look at the code. So here is kubectl get pod. OK, looks familiar? So what we're doing, we find all the spaces, we add semicolons, we trim them, and then it looks like structured data, right? Convert from CSV. All right. Let's take a look. All right. So, and I'm working straight out of my sessions repository. So everything you're going to see here is there. It's publicly available. It's in a different branch right now. But just in case you're interested, and this probably needs to be zoomed in. Oh, sorry. Oh, I brought my mouse with me today because my touchpad doesn't always work. All right. All right, is this big enough for folks in the back, or should I zoom it in one more? One more? OK. We'll go full screen too. How's that? Good? OK, cool. So let's make sure my Kubernetes cluster is working. I have test output in case it isn't. OK, cool. OK, so this is straight raw output from kubectl get pod. It should be a little bigger down here, but that should look familiar, right? I've just got a couple of Apache pods running and my Docker version. So if we look at what that outputs, right, it's an array. Okay, it's nothing special. And specifically, it's an array of strings. You guys all know the get type method, right? Okay. If I'm showing something that's new to you and you want me to explain it, let me know and I'll stop. And there's three lines specifically. We got the header line and then the two pods. Okay. All right. So this is the test data. All right. So we're specifically, or when I say we, it kind of made me, specifically using the header row to actually calculate. Is this too low down here at the bottom? For you in the back, you could say, OK. So we're specifically going to use this header row to calculate the indexes of where to insert the semicolons. Okay. And here on line 21, this is just straight from the module itself. I'm doing some checking to make sure that it's what we expect. So for example, if one of the commands, like get log, for example, it doesn't have headers, so we're going to avoid that. There is some additional logic that I have in here to handle that, and we'll get into it, but I want to talk about parsing first. And here, line 25, this is the only regular expression I'm using. Space, space, / capital S. If you're not familiar with regular expressions, it's literally looking for any two spaces followed by a non-space character. Like I said, there's no fancy regular expressions. It's just one really simple one. And so if we use select string with the all matches parameter, it's going to find all of them, which is cool. Let's do that. All right, so now M has, and I really like select string in PowerShell 7, by the way, with the highlights. So we found all of those, and if we look at that in a table, we get this nice idea of all the indexes where we need to insert a delimiter. So in this case, I'm using semicolons. I started with commas, but if a service has multiple ports, it separates them with commas, and that got some weird output. I haven't seen a reason not to use semicolons yet, but there might be one. All right. Lines 33 to 38 here. We're going to iterate through that array. And we're specifically, for each line, we're going to sort the indexes descending, because we want to put the semicolons at the end of the string first, so it doesn't increase the index for the next ones. Does that make sense? So it's one of the good use cases for dash descending. And we're doing index +2 because it's got the two spaces. So I'm going to run that. And now we have output with semicolons in it, a little bit extra spacing. We're going to get rid of that here in a second. All right, and so here on line 45, and we'll get into this in the module, I have some logic to make sure that the input that I expect from the command and subcommand is something that I can actually parse. And so I'm dealing with formats specifically. And so my module is set up to use the argument 0, argument 1. So I don't have a param block, so it parses the arguments to the args array, which is intentional. And so I use that to tell the PowerShell formatter which format to use. So I'm hard coding it here because we don't have the rest of the module to just get pod, because it's output from get pod. And so now, if we take and we, oh, I'm sorry, I lied earlier. This is one additional regular expression. We have, using a regex replace, the space plus semicolon. It's replacing all of it. Every time there's a semicolon with at least one space in it, it's replacing all of that with just a semicolon. So this is what it looks like. Okay, now we got CSV structured data. And so I'm going to pipe that to trim in case there's additional spaces it's missed, and convert from CSV. And now this should look like what we expect our output to look like, except that it's not a table. So remember I mentioned that we want to preserve output. So to handle that, you guys have seen output with more than 3 columns as a table in PowerShell, right? Those are done using formats. And so is anybody here not familiar with the PS object property? So every PowerShell object has PS object property. It's a hidden property. You can't tab complete it. Frustrates me every time I try to type it. But you can insert a type name into this. And so if we insert our type name of getPod, I have a format, and we'll get into how to write the formats in an automated fashion. And it outputs as a table. And there's nothing fancy in here. This all runs very quickly. I mean, we can use our human reflexes to calculate to see if there's much difference between getPod and kubectl getPod. I mean, I don't know if there was a noticeable delay there. Not for me. OK, and some of the logic down here, line 55, if it doesn't have a format that I'm accounting for here, it just outputs it without adding a format in it. That's all it does. So in that case, it just falls back to a list. All right, any questions? Cool. All right, so the whole thing is 40 lines. This is not a complicated function. So you notice I've got function k, no param block, and specifically so I get the arguments in that args array. And also, and we'll get into this with the formats, I've got a JSON file where I've got all the commands and subcommands that are currently supported by the formatter in Special K. And I have to import this for some of the logic to work. But we'll talk about that here in a minute. And I have some commands that don't have output. So exec, copy, scale, rollout, delete logs. There's probably additional ones. I haven't had the time to go through every single command in kubectl. But it's on the schedule at some point. And so if it's one of those commands, because it's the args array, I can simply call kubectl with that args array, and it works. Okay? So I mean, we don't want to try to format kubectl exec or whatnot. So that's what that does. If there's additional ones that you're aware of, let me know. I'll add them. And otherwise, we're going to capture that output. And James Brundage calls this command interception. I think that's what his words were for it. And he said he does it in one of his modules, so we have to unite on what we call it. So we're calling that command interception. And then the rest of this is stuff we've already seen. We're gonna look for those headers that we expect, and then format it. And then down at the bottom, oops, we're actually getting that type name from the command subcommand. So get pod or config, get context, that kind of thing. Any questions on that? Cool. All right, so one of the things that I found, I'm going to run through some gotchas with this. So in this case, it formats all the objects as strings, or all the properties as strings. And I don't have a good solution for this, so I want to walk through what some of the gotchas are. So pods. So we've got some pods here. And the first time I tested this, my restart property was all 0, so it looked like an integer. And of course, now it's 2 with 41 minutes to go in parentheses. So this isn't going to make as much sense as I hoped. So imagine one of these columns was an integer, OK? However, it only looks like an integer. They're all strings. And we can look at another good example is top. So top pod that's going to give us CPU memory information if you have a metrics server running. And it would be great if I could say, top pod where, CPU is greater than, X. But, it's, again, it's strings. And so what we can do is we can get into how strings or integers that are strings are compared in PowerShell, but it gets really wonky. So for instance, we can say where restarts is less than 2, and it gets us none of the, well, actually, it's because I updated this earlier from, let's try 3. So I think this one, yeah. So that one works. So I want to very specifically point out, this is an integer, and restarts is a string. And this is, I don't have a good explanation for this because I just discovered this like a week ago, how this string stuff works. I was like, yeah. So I'm just talking about this because it's really interesting. But equals, I should say equals 2. This one obviously won't work, even though those are 2 restarts. So there's some ways we can get around that. Oh, and in top. So these are both greater than 20. So I'm doing memory bytes greater than 20. 20 is an integer. 21 MI is a string, but that one works. If that was 200 something, actually, let's try that. Greater than 2, or we'll say greater than 3. I don't think this one will work. So string 21 is not greater than integer 3. Greater than 200? That's actually a good idea. Let's try that. That does work. And I think it's because it's comparing, the 2 to 2, the 0 to 1, and then the 0 to m. Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. Well, OK.
I'll say old school. How's that?
So the comment is it's normal. And yes, it is normal because it's strings. You shouldn't compare strings to integers. I guess that's probably the moral. Yes, yes. So there are some ways around that. So if, for instance, you want to get like your pods that have the most memory, you have the -- sort by memory in kubectl. I've got some other filter left options. And why did that? Oh, OK. I'm sorry. I even had this problem when I was testing earlier. I was supposed to import k.ps1, and I didn't do that. All right. Let's try that again. There we go. So you have a sort by memory, and you can select the highest memory. So it does, it sorts by descending by default. And you can do the same thing with sort by CPU with ktop node. And it's the same thing, highest to lowest. And then another example, so we're talking strings and integers. Let's get into time spans and integers. So, excuse me. The last seen column, oh, I got a lot of events here. Looks like a time span, right? 7 days, 13 hours. And it'd be really cool to have a custom class that the toString method showed 7 days, 13 hours, so and in the back end, so you could compare them, and they were actually time spans. I haven't gotten into trying that. Not sure what kind of performance impact that would have, but just a thought. So for example, if we do, we compare this to dates, it doesn't work. Surprise, surprise, right? So we're comparing the last seen to greater than 45 minutes ago, but 7 days, 13 hours is not in the last 45 minutes. All right. And we can say less than 45, and you notice we were talking about the strings. 142 is less than 45 as a string. No. I feel like you guys are getting this a lot faster than I expected, so this is good. But you can get creative if you really need to do this with where object. So for instance, if you want to find all the events in the last 45 minutes, you can say, where it ends in a 45, and last seen is less than 45. However, if the minutes go above a certain, 100, and if the minutes is 100 minutes, then this would obviously fail. But that's why you should filter left with kubectl, and I'll get into this some more. You have the sort by time stamped, and then you can select the last 5, so the most recent. There we go. Now I'm seeing the most recent events. So the moral of the story is don't compare strings to integers, strings to date times, strings to anything that's not a string, and use some of the sort by stuff. Yeah, question? So the question is, have I considered converting the string to something that could be compared to an integer or something? And the answer is yes. and that's something I want to test to see if it doesn't have a very big performance impact. Because I mean, this is really just a time span, right? So there's no reason we couldn't have a custom class that is a time span that this toString method still shows exactly the same as kubectl, and then we can compare it to other time span. But I'm not sure what the performance impact is, but it's something I'm going to try. Yeah, and if we go back to the original 4 requirements, this meets the requirements. The requirement wasn't to be able to filter with where object. That wasn't one of the requirements. So anyway, so something else I found that you guys might appreciate. So here, so I'm in PowerShell 7.3.4 right here. String 0 is greater than -1 in PowerShell 7.3.4. PowerShell, Windows PowerShell, string 0 is not greater than -1. So there is some differences between PowerShell 7 and PowerShell 5 on comparing strings and integers, which you shouldn't be doing anyway, right? It's just, I saw this and I was a little surprised. So cool. But this string 0 is greater than 1, or sorry, is less than 1 in both cases. So just be aware that there are some weird things happen when you compare strings to non-strings, okay? Moral of the gotchas section. Okay. Okay, so I think, yeah, the rest of this, okay, we're not going to get back to the slides for a while. Cool. All right, so let's talk about formats. So let me save this. Okay. So in handling formats for Special K, what I'm doing is I have a JSON file where I write out all of the command-subcommand combinations that generate something that can actually be parsed. So stored as JSON, pretty simple. So k get pod, k top pod, k config get context, etc. And so what I'm doing with that is 2 things. So and I mentioned this in the actual function itself. Here on line 3, I'm importing that file so that I don't accidentally try to apply a format to an object that doesn't have one. But I'm also have a script that reads that, and these are all scrolled to the bottom because I was practicing this morning. A script that reads that and then uses that to write formats. So here's how I'm doing that. So I'm importing it, and we're not going to run it right now because it takes a little bit. Actually, we can take a look at that object. So I'm importing it, and now I have commands, which is as a hash table, because I like hash tables, so the same stuff we saw in JSON. And for each command, and then for each subcommand, I'm going to, line 15, I'm going to use k to tell me what properties that object has. So it's kind of a circular dependency. So I use this during the build phase of my module. So it builds, and by build, I mean, put it all in a PSM1, just the PowerShell build, right? And it imports the module, and then it runs through all the commands. So it has to have a cluster that it talks to be able to regenerate formats, but it does have a flag to reuse formats. And then it uses, for the first object, it will look at the psobject.properties.name. You guys are all familiar with psobject, again. So it has, a property called properties, which has all of the properties on that object, and we can look at name. So this gives me an array of all the properties that object has. Kubectl output is all tables. So it's all the same formats, they're just different property names, right? So with that, and because I hate running these things by hand, or here, let's get rid of this, I've just written out an array of strings, where here, like line 28, I'm replacing the name with the command dash subcommand. So get dash pod, for example. Line 30, so view selected by, and I am by no means a format expert, but I know this is telling PowerShell to select this view by the name of the object type. So remember how I was inserting the object type into the object itself? So that's how it gets selected. And then for each of those properties, I'm adding the table column header item, and it's just using string replaces. Same thing here with table column item property names. That's it. You don't have to know a lot about formats to know how this works, right? We don't want to replace things in strings. Cool. And at the bottom, we're taking all of that, we're compiling it into an actual, I always forget the extension, whatever the format file is called. And we will look at one of those here. All right. So that's what we expect, right? Get pod, column names. Pretty straightforward. Does that make sense, everybody? Cool. Question, yeah. So the question is, -o wide adds extra columns. -n namespace or -- all namespaces also adds extra columns. Does this handle that? The answer, we're going to go a little off script here. The answer is, oh, whoops, where are we going? Oh, here we go. I thought I had this up, sorry guys. So the answer is, I submitted a couple of these issues this morning. So yeah, that's something I found, and I anticipated someone might ask a question about it, so thank you for doing that. So yes, I have an idea for how to handle that. It's not currently handled, but the intention is to handle that, because it's really easy to say, does args contain -o, and then does the next index wide, right? It's not difficult, it's just not implemented. Cool. Any other questions? Okay. But yeah, this is why you don't write these by hand, right? And I guess that's only 220 lines, it's not bad. But. Okay. So, how are we doing on time? Oh, just fine, just fine. Okay, so this is, so one of the things, as a PowerShell person, oh, nice. I intended to have all this minimized to look cool. So as a PowerShell person, when I get objects, I like to do where object, right? And so with kubectl, I found that I was doing that way too much after I did this. Specifically, when I was writing a CI/CD pipe in Bash, and I had to do some nice filtering with kubectl. Had no idea how to do it. And so I made the decision then I needed to learn how to do more filtering left. So I want to walk through some of those examples, if they're not already familiar, and talk about some advantages of kubectl and some advantages of where object. Because there are cases where where object, it's a lot easier than what you can do with kubectl. So for instance, kget pod, right? We get this with nice output. We want to find all the running pods. There's only 2 running. Sorry, sometimes I hit F8 and 7 at the same time, apparently. We can say where status equals running. We get the expected output. However, the problem here is kget pod. If you've got, maybe your cluster's having problems, you have thousands of evicted pods. I've been there. Kget pod takes a while to get all that data, and then you're filtering it down to just the few you have running. Filter left, right? So you can use the -- field selector equals status.phase equals running. And this only shows us the running pods, which is the same as before, but we're having kubectl do it. But remember, Special K's mantra is it's the same syntax. So we can take that same exact thing and run it with Special K, and it works. You now have skills in PowerShell and kubectl. I mean, that's the whole idea here. And also because I hate writing help. So the help for Special K is literally the kubectl help. It's already written for me. All right. So we can do the same thing with status does not equal running. Great. Don't get anything. Kubectl, status does not equal running. No resource is found in the default namespace. And I think this one's one that actually errors because I don't handle that output yet. So I think it's an error. One of the things that's going to improve. So yes, you can run that with Special K, but what it should show is that no resource is found in the default namespace without the error, but it errors. So, all right. So a fun fact. How did I know that that was status.phase? I mean, because in the kubectl output, it's just status, right? Yeah, it's just status. Like, how did I know that was status.phase? This is something that's going to be wild to figure out. So if we look at the JSON output, so I'm going to do kget pod -o JSON, convert from JSON, and that gives me an items array, which I'm going to set to the pods variable here. So if we look at that, it's going to be an array of the pods from the JSON object. There's a lot of data here, so if you need more data, use -o JSON, pipe it to convert from JSON. But it has a status property, and I'm looking specifically at the first pod, so pod 0. And inside, here, let me make this a little bigger. Inside of the status, let's just run that again. Inside of the status property, we have a phase property. So it's status.phase equals running. So it's using the JSON path in the field selector. So, and we'll get into an example where that doesn't work. Not all resources support filtering by all properties. I'll show you an example where it doesn't work. You get some nice output, so it's really easy to understand. So again, status.phase running. All right. So here's a fun one. Getting pods by app. So if you give it the label, app equals, there's not really a good way to do this with special K and where object. I mean, if you have the app name and the pod name, I mean, maybe, but that's even not a given. I'm just using that as my kind of example. Use the -L, which is -- selector. So we can say app equals and then the app name. In this case, Apache. And again, does this work in special K? Well, yes, it does. So we can do -L, app equals Apache. Cool. And we can also do namespaces. So I mentioned namespaces, not yet supported, but we can get pods that are in the cube system namespace. Great. Looks like some of them are rebooting a lot. Oh well, it's in Docker, don't care. And again, we can do this with special K, but you'll notice, okay, wow, sorry. Special K, where's the namespace column? It's not there because the format's telling it not to output that. So it's not supported yet, but it will be. It's not difficult to support, it's just not implemented. Another thing that I found that was really easy using PowerShell instead of Bash is what if you need to return in a Bash script and I'm not a Bash expert, by the way. If you ask me to write awk or grep without the help or without a Stack Overflow, I can't do it. But if you have a case where you need to get the specific, just the name as a string of a specific pod, with special K, we have an array and we have property names. So I can get all of my pods from my Apache app and get just the first one in a name, and then I can do something with that value. Maybe execute a command on it or something. In PowerShell, that's really easy. I just get a string for the name of the pod. How do you do that in Bash? You do that. Well, let me rephrase that. How do you do that with just kubectl? I don't have Bash locally. Sorry. So we have the same thing. So -L app equals Apache. We're using the field selector again. Status.phase equals running. But then with -O, we have this option to use JSON path, and so you can tell it what properties to output. So this is it JQ? That's the notation for JQ, I think, JSON query. So what this is going to do is it's only going to output the names of the pods, but it does it in kind of a weird format that you wouldn't expect as a PowerShell user. I wouldn't either. And so just one of the examples where I feel like PowerShell is a little better. And generally speaking, I feel like PowerShell is just a little better by default. But we're not biased or anything at the PowerShell Summit. All right, couple examples with nodes. So one of the things I found with nodes is you have this column called status, the status ready. What I found is there's not a way to use kubectl to filter on that. But we can do that with where objects. So I'm doing it here. The only solution I found uses some version of awk and grep that I didn't understand, so I didn't want to try to explain it to you guys when I didn't understand it. So just wanted to mention that one. And then with services, this is another example I found where we can use PowerShell to filter by the cluster IP. So I can say where the service is equal to a specific IP address. It's cluster IP down here. And yes, that's still just a string, but in this case, I'm comparing it to a string, so that's OK. But if we look at the, so the JSON output of services, let me do this here. Oh, well, this actually will do this whole line. So it's services.spec.cluster IP. It's an IP address. It's that same 10.96.0.1. But if I try to do kubectl get service field selector equals spec.cluster IP equals the IP address, we get this nice error that says that spec.cluster IP is not a known field selector, only metadata.name or metadata.namespace. So there are some limitations to filtering with kubectl. Cool. So I hope I've convinced you that this solution to learning kubectl and keeping it PowerShell friendly is good. And if anyone here is interested, this is the, oops. This is a repository where I've got it. It's all open source. It's available on the PowerShell gallery. I'll have an updated version here. Not one that yet supports -o wider namespaces, but I'll have an updated version here that has some additional outputs supported. Published here soon. And if you guys want to fork it, submit a PR, please do. It's really not a complicated module, and for me, I found it really useful, especially since it has that opinionated K alias instead of kubectl. But that's all I got. Any questions? Yes.
Okay, how are you handling errors?
Let's look at it. So that's where, and you notice the one error where there's no resources in the default namespace? Right. That one wasn't handled. However, what I have implemented now is, oh, sorry, wrong file. Let me actually grab the k.ps one. So here we're getting the output, right? Out equals kubectl args. And if this output matches this string, so the headers that I expect from the objects that I'm aware of, then we do stuff with it. Otherwise, we just output out.
So you don't output the stream to like an error stream or to an info stream?
You caught me. I had someone else mention that. Yes, I don't do that yet. To do that, I'd have to use the commandlet bindings and to be able to throw the error and stuff. But yes, I'm going to explore doing that. And that's what I love about coming to the summit is people think about things that I would never have thought of. So I have a huge list of things I'm going to do to this in the next couple weeks.
Well, I did something similar with another function, so I might look at implementing here and then
Great. I would love that. Yeah. And I think I forgot to mention the question for the recording. The question was, how do you handle errors? So, sorry, guys. Anyone that's watching this from home, I'm sorry. Any other questions? I think I saw another hand, maybe. All right. Oh, good. Only 2 minutes early. So, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.